I love so many things about North Dakota, and one of the things I love the best is how anxious we are to help one another. You see it all the time. You've seen the traffic jams at entryways when you're trying to go into a restaurant or a building as people stop to hold the doors open for one another. If you've ever stopped alongside one of our roads to take a picture or a phone call or to change a tire, you've probably had multiple people stop just to make sure you don't need any help. Another way North Dakotans can show kindness to their neighbors is by getting vaccinated. Vaccinations keep vulnerable people safe from severe illness and death. They keep our economy running by keeping our businesses open. They help us stay mentally healthy by allowing us to connect with others through church events or community groups. They also keep our healthcare workers safe and on the job. Getting vaccinated is a choice you can make to help your neighbors, your community, and your state. So talk to your doctor about it and follow their advice to get the vaccinations that will help keep you and all the people you care about healthy and happy. To learn more, go to spreadlovenotcovidnd.org, a website set up by the North Dakota State University Center for Immunization Research and Education.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and something that has made news a lot recently in the Attorney General's office, in fact, it's been making headlines for months, is a building project, which when Attorney General Attorney General Drew Wrigley, our current Attorney General, was appointed to replace former Attorney General Wayne Stenjum. Shortly after that happened, Wrigley notified first the state auditor's office and then the legislature that there was a very large budget overrun in that office related to I call it a building project. I guess that's part of it, but basically it was new office space for the BCI and some other departments in the Attorney General's office. After that, we had kind of a cascading series of scandals where it came out that some email accounts that were myself and others had filed open records requests for emails from the Attorney General, from Deputy Attorney General Troy Seibel, and those requests were in part resulted in no. We got some records. I shouldn't say that, but a lot of the records were gone. The email accounts are deleted. That made headlines. Now we're down to the question of whether or not this deal, this lease that was drawn up with a company that one of the owners is a lawmaker. That lawmaker joins us, Representative Jason Dockter. He's a Republican from Bismarck. Of course, joining me as he always does on Wednesdays is Chad Oban. Jason, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
There was an audit report that I think you would probably agree with me made this situation look very negative for you. And I guess, first of all, just tell us about that. I mean, that came out. That certainly gave the public impression of what went on. What was your reaction? What do you have to say about it?
Well, my reaction, I was pretty shocked because I was actually at the North Dakota Greater Chamber. I was on a panel, and I knew that they were going to give the report in the afternoon. And if I recall, I believe there were over 25 emails we received from the auditor, and we had 2 in-person meetings, and then my business partner had one more to show a tour of the building. And at no time did they bring up any of these issues that they felt were issues that they brought in the report. They never once contacted us about those issues. So from my perspective, I was like, if they had something that they weren't sure of or anything, they would have been emailing us or talking to us about that to see if we have the documentation, what's the reasoning for this, so then they can give a complete report. In my eyes, it was an inaccurate and an incomplete report. And I don't know if you read the Tribune article. The auditor basically said they didn't have enough time. Well, why didn't they contact the Senator Klein, the chairman, and say, can we have more time? Instead, what he did is put an incomplete report, was dragging people through the mud. And I just want to say, this isn't new. I mean, we can go back to the state library. We can go to the Department of Commerce. These are things that the auditor has done in the past. And from what I see, this is what he did with this report.
So, Representative Dockter, reading the response from your attorney, Monty Rogdemy, I'm going to be honest, I didn't read the whole thing. It's 800 pages. I read maybe the first 10.
So you actually have a life then, because
yeah, exactly right. So, can you sort of talk through, one of the things that I don't think that people necessarily understand is, so you have DNS LLC, which then does business under Parkway Property Management, and then also has Frontier Contracting. And so there's these three different companies. Why are there three different companies? And isn't that part of the confusion, that who's doing what? And I think it's the same owners for all three companies, right? Can you just sort of explain the thought process of why you set up these businesses the way you did?
Okay, yep. And to let you know, there actually two. So what it is, it's DNS doing business. So doing business as, they call them DBAs, as Parkway Property. My business partner and I, we bought the business in late 2015, and it was already called Parkway. So we had to set up an entity that was separate, but we could use it as a DBA. When we purchased the business, there was also, they had a maintenance / repair company within Parkway. And we felt at the time we need to have a separate entity in order to do these repairs and everything, so we can keep track for an accounting. So then we formed Frontier Contracting. So we're the same owners, and it's for accounting. And so basically, they call them, subsidiary, or they're together with the same owners, but separate for accounting purposes. Because at any time we felt, if we ever down the road wanted to sell the maintenance, we could just sell the Frontier part. If we wanted to sell the management part, we would just sell DNS. And how we bought the business, it took us a while to figure, because it was a little confusing, because everything was commingled, and that's why we did it. So it's a lot of. Go ahead.
So Rob, I'm going to jump in. But just to be clear, the contractor license was not held by Frontier Contracting. It's actually held by DNS LLC.
Correct, with Parkway. Yep. And the reason for that is Frontier Contracting actually does not have any employees. We have vehicles and we have equipment. So what we have, it's called a common paymaster. And what that is, you can have two companies that with the same owners, and you pay. So DNS has all the employees. We do all the work. So we have all of our insurance and our contractor's license through DNS, which is Parkway Property. And then we have Frontier Contracting. As the report reflects, and going forward, we should have had Frontier Contracting doing business as Parkway. So there was the confusion. I will admit that our invoices should have stated that. So the confusion, but that's how we've always done our business, to separate, everything out. So Frontier Contracting doesn't have any employees. We don't, so all of our workforce safety, job service, everything is all under DNS, doing business as Parkway.
Jason, I think one concern that a lot of people have had about this is your involvement, because you're a state lawmaker, and you were also involved in the former, where this deal was done under the former Attorney General. You were involved in his campaign. When I'm reading the report, and by the way, those of you listening to this, I'm embedding the entire 816-page report and series of documents that came from Representative Dockter's attorney. That'll be embedded in the news article that's with this. So if you want to look at that, you can certainly find that at Inforum, all the places where this podcast publishes, where most of you listen to it. As I'm reading that on page 8, I think it's point number 55. It says the report incorrectly questions how Dockter became involved in this project. As noted above, the genesis was an informal conversation between Dockter and Director Grabowska, who's a director of the BCI, I believe, if I'm getting that right.
That's correct.
Which resulted in further communications between Parkway and the Attorney General and the Office of Management and Budget. Then it goes on, and this is point 57, and you're really stressing here. The report stresses that Stealth did not purchase the building before securing a lease with the Attorney General. The finding is incomplete. Parkway executed a purchase agreement and paid $30,000 in earnest money on the building, which was not contingent on any agreement with the Attorney General. Now, Jason, I'm reading those two things, and I'm thinking, it feels like you're making distinctions without a difference. Like you had an informal conversation with somebody at BCI. Based on that informal conversation, you enter into a purchase agreement for a building you'd like to lease to the Attorney General's office. Now, I realize your purchase agreement wasn't contingent on the AG's office coming in, but I think a lot of people are looking at that saying, listen, this is a state lawmaker who's good friends with the Attorney General's office. Do you understand how that might appear to the public?
Oh, yeah, Rob, yes, I totally agree. So I'll back up and kind of walk through everything.
Sure.
So everything you said was correct. So let's go to the purchase agreement. So in November, we actually did a purchase agreement. We went back and forth on the pricing. And then on December 5th, we executed a purchase agreement and that we were going to buy the building. And where it comes in, where the Attorney General and their lease wasn't contingent on the sale, the building is actually, it's approximately like 42,000 square feet. So Chad, you would remember the old Sykes building in Bismarck. It's two buildings. And Rob, they have the same exact building in Minot.
I used to work in that building at one point.
Oh, okay.
I worked for Sykes when I was in high school, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Small world. So half of it, when we executed the purchase agreement, was already leased out by the health department. The other half was leased out by ITD because they had the debacle with their building where they had all those issues and they had to move out. So when we did the purchase agreement, and we've already talked to the AG, our intent was, okay, we're going to buy this building. We know that half of it's going to be leased no matter what to the health department. We know that ITD is going to move out because I can't remember the end date, but then it was be month to month. But they already knew that they were moving out because they were going to go back to their building. That was their whole intent. And so when we went to the bank, you can go, so they go on the numbers and they say, okay, what are you going to, so we have half of it leased out and everything. Okay, yep, numbers work. Well, then when we got farther along with the AG and the AG says, yep, we're going to go along with this, but we want these remodeling costs and then we want to do an addition. Well, once that triggered, the bank says, okay, you're going to have a lease because we're not going to give you an operating loan or extra funding to do a build out and do a new building without having a lease. It's no different than if I was a farmer and I wanted to rent out more land and I go to my banker and say, I need an operating loan for all my inputs and everything. The first thing the banker is going to say, where's the lease that we have? Even though you're not going to do it till next year, we need to have a lease in place because we have to know, are you going to be able to pay it back? And that was our whole thing, is that we were going to buy the building and we could have made a cash flow just with the health department. But once the AG established that they need the remodeling, we had to get a signed agreement or the bank wouldn't give you the extra funds to do the remodeling. No one would, in their right mind, would remodel and do a new building without having a lease in place. And no bank would ever, unless you pay cash. We couldn't pay cash. We financed the building. No bank would give you the loan. Does that make?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I think what your status as a lawmaker, I think, is the variable that a lot of people are having a hard time. How many of us can cut a multi-million-dollar deal with the state government based on an informal conversation? Do other property managers have that? Or I guess, I don't know what to call it, developers or property landlords. Do they have that sort of access to the state government where they can have an informal conversation and can, I mean, at the very least, you had at least a good idea. I mean, it seemed like you were betting that the Attorney General's office would probably lease. I think people are really worried about that level of access, that you had a level of access that other people who might be competing with you for the state's business don't have.
Well, my answer would be that, and we can go back to the report, but as everyone can see by the report, in 2016, the Attorney General was already looking, and they would have purchased Saxford Grade School, but it got bought by a church. I don't know what, there's a church now that in that location. And they also looked at the Sears building. They're looking at different buildings. There are people, there are other lawmakers that have, have leases with the state. We gave them, I had an informal conversation. I went to a realtor. They said, this is something that could work. And as it states in the report, Troy Seibel said, here, we need to have drawings to see if it can fit. And, they had other projects that, that come and go. I do this, Rob, we do this all the time. We do projects. We get some, we don't get some. It just all depends. There's just so many variables that go through. And as you can see by the report, they didn't sign a lease until April. Until then, we were, 6 weeks out, we were going to buy the building regardless. That's just how things happen, and we always talk in North Dakota, we're a citizen legislature. We meet every 2 years for 80 days. We talk about this. We pride ourselves on that. But now people are coming and say, okay, the private citizen, Jason Dockter, not the representative, should he be able to get this opportunity? My answer is, I have to make a living. Was the lease appropriate? Was it a fair market? And the answer is yes. I'll go back to the report. So the auditor, when they met with us, I said, well, their rent is actually less. And she goes, well, that's not true per square foot, because it's 2,600 square feet less than their previous building. And my answer would be, the AG looked at it and they said in the drawing, okay, we can fit the same amount than our current building. And as you know, Rob, working there, the Sykes building is just a big open. There's no really hallways or anything. The usable space is maxed. Where their old building, BCI, they had all these hallways and different things that made it so they still had to pay rent, but it wasn't usable space. And so if you look at the numbers at $950 a square foot and you take it times that 2,600, it's approximately $25,000 a year the AG was going to save by moving from their current location, their previous location, to the current one. And through all of this, they got everything custom they wanted. They got a shop. And in the original plan, the shop was only one bay. They added another bay. So they got everything they want. And the goal we always talk about in the legislature, how can the government become more efficient? Well, this is a prime example. You take several different agencies that were scattered out through the town, putting them together to be more efficient, to save money on rent, and to get a building that's functional for them. Because BCI is a very unique agency. I mean, there are law enforcement for the Attorney General. And with the current location, Chad can verify where the current location is. The BCI is right by the crime lab now. They are very close to the crime lab. They need to be by the highway to have access to get to other cities. There was all these, things that the AG had to look at and make a decision. And so they got a custom building, and they got their rent reduced.
So, Representative Dockter, I think we're sort of glossing over some of the ethical concerns that people are concerned about. So again, going back to the report from Monty Rognaby on page 2 under facts, it says during the 2019 legislative session, so you were working as a legislator, this was during the session, Dockter had an informal conversation with Lonnie Grabowska, Division Director of BCI, North Dakota Office of Attorney General, at the state capitol. Mr. Grabowska indicated the Attorney General had been searching for a building in Bismarck to lease for the BCI. Dockter indicated to Director Grabowska that Parkway could assist the Attorney General. Dockter asked whether Director Grabowska wanted assistance for the building. So you are a sitting legislator at the state capitol during the legislative session when the Attorney General's budget is before the legislature, and you have an informal conversation about this. First of all, did you consider recusing yourself from any issues having to do with the Attorney General's budget? But secondly, can you not see the potential conflicts of a sitting legislator soliciting business from a state agency during the legislative session? I mean, you're talking about citizen versus legislator, but literally in the report that you provided, you said it was during the session at the Capitol. This wasn't citizen Jason Dockter. This was Representative Dockter in the Capitol having this conversation. Can you see why that sort of reeks and why people would be uncomfortable with that? Even if the end product was good, how you got there just seems icky, for lack of better words. Can you respond to that? I mean, it just doesn't seem like this is an option that most contractors, most people would have when they're voting for the Attorney General's budget?
Well, I could tell you how the conversation went, and yeah, it looks like conflict. But again, I'm assistant. I've known, Grabowska for a long time. We in the hallway, we're talking about a committee thing, and then I said, we got on something on the building because where my current office is at, I'm right south of Capital Electric in Bismarck, and theirs was on the end. And I said, congratulate, because I think Lonnie just got the BCI director job just very before this conversation. I said, hey, congratulations. Hey, by the way, I think your office is right up the street. And then that's from my office. And that's how we got in the conversation. And we came to that. All the documentation's there. Yes, there's a conflict. But again, it's just, if he says, yeah, we're looking for a building and this is what my business does, do I just say, well, we looked at the opportunity, we presented it, the AG made a decision, they're saving money on rent, they got a custom building. And now what you see with the findings, and after, because this whole time, and the auditor didn't present it, they were estimates because they wanted to have everything paid in the 21 biennium. Now that you look, we're going to owe back the state because we did some electrical work where they didn't have to get a new generator. They got to use their current generator that they had for some of their divisions, and we saved them other money. And so at the end of the day, taxpayers going to say, what do they have a reasonable rent rate? Okay, and they saved money. They got everything. They got everything that they wanted to be efficient. And at the end of the day, people are going to make conclusions. I completely understand with the conflict, but again, we had a conversation. I have conversations with people all the time, and people will say, they'll come up to me and say, well, Doc, how did you get this? How did you get so-and-so to rent a building or to do a building over here with your property management? Well, I was in grade school with them. I was whatever. I'm a lifelong resident of Bismarck. I just know people for years, and I pride myself. I have great relationships with people. I'm honest and upfront, and I always with people. And if people are going to look at that, then I don't know what to say. It's one thing if I got a lease and the lease is $3 more a square foot, and the state's paying this much more, and they have this and that. Well, then that would. But this is within. You had OMB, you had the Attorney General, you had all these different areas looking at this to make sure this is a good lease, a fair lease, and it was going to fit what the AG's office wanted. There was just not just one. There were several people involved with this decision.
Do you feel, because you're right, there were a lot of people who signed off on this. They're state employees. And obviously most of them not elected. I think the only person involved in the AG's office of this who's elected would be former AG Wayne Stenjum. Is that not part of the conflict, though? You're talking about people whose budgets you vote on, right? If you're a state employee and you're being asked by a state lawmaker, hey, what do you think of this proposal? If it's just a member of the public, there's an added, I think, consideration there where they're like, well, hey, this guy also votes on my budget. Now, would you do that, Jason? Would you, if you didn't get a contract, and would you take, retribution on them in committee on a budget or something? I'd like to think that you wouldn't, but let's say it's not you. Should other lawmakers be able to wield that sort of power? Maybe not everybody's Jason Dockter. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, Rob, I totally get it. If you look at my voting record, there's only a few budgets I've ever voted no on. I usually go with the recommendation of what, appropriations.
Yeah.
There is a bill. There is a bill floating around that will probably come next session that you have to recuse yourself of voting on budgets. I have no problem. I stand up on conflict. You can look back. I don't know the date, but I've stood up on other conflicts of interest too. If that's what people want, it's no different than, should I stand up if I'm a teacher and recuse myself that I'm going to vote on an education budget? Where are we going to go? Or there's something for farmers, or there's something for engineers or attorneys. Are we all just going to keep standing up? I mean, I'm a big proponent of education. Do I expect educators to stand up and say, well, no, I don't like this formula because my school district's going to give me a $3,000 raise? No, because we are citizens. It comes to the point, what people want us to do, I will do it. I'll recuse myself, do whatever. But at what point do people have to, we give more money to law enforcement. Someone's in law enforcement. Someone's a social worker. We've been giving more to DHS so social workers get paid more. I'm all for that. We need social workers to get paid better. We have social workers in legislature. Do they stand up and recuse themselves? No, because people know that we are citizens. We have other lives besides the legislature. And, that's just this how it goes. So if I have to recuse myself, I have no problem. Anyone else, any other lawmakers that have leases with the state, they can recuse themselves too of any budgets that they have.
Yeah, and I think those are all fair points in terms of recusal. And I don't think there should be any sort of bans on state legislators owning property and leasing it to the state. I think that, again, I think you are a citizen. What I think makes this slightly different is the conversation took place while you were a sitting legislator and while this stuff was going on. And, I guess my question for you, Representative Dockter, is it normal practice for state legislators to solicit business during the legislative session from state entities? I can't imagine that's a normal practice during the legislative session.
Well, what I'll say to that is, I'm a legislator. When I'm elected, I'm a legislator for 4 years. Every day, regardless if I'm in during session, out of session, I'm a lawmaker. Constituents call me all the time. I'm always allowed. So yeah, it was at the Capitol. Informal conversation. I've known Lonnie for years. It was just an informal conversation. I gave everything, and as in the auditor's report, they wouldn't put the emails that said that Director Gerbowska and then reached back out to us and said, yeah, we would like to have a meeting. The auditor just forgot to include that. He forgot to include a lot of things. He wanted a narrative and to go down a road. And I am a lawmaker and I'm a citizen, but all my other partners are all private citizens. And the path that the auditors took on this is, to me, is unbelievable. To me, it's to go after private citizens, to put in a report that one of the owners basically got paid for work, and couldn't verify the invoice, and to drag them through the mud is totally different than going when he went after the commerce and the state librarian. Those are state people that he went after, but he specifically went after private citizens without getting back, without asking them for any of the information. To me, it's so unacceptable, and I can't even believe that private citizens would have to go through this. Getting back to the entity, by law, it's called you go into LLCs. So if you have 20 people, you don't have to list everyone. We legally could have told the auditor, nope, we don't want to do this. What we did is what they call in the business world piercing an LLC. We revealed who the owners were. We didn't have to. We could have just said, go ahead. But I was being as transparent as anything. We gave all the information. I am as transparent and I'm as honest as I will tell you anything. We gave all of our emails up. We didn't have to give our emails up. I mean, the whole issue was, okay, they lost these emails with the AG. So we said, we'll give all of our correspondence that we did have. And so they could figure out what was going on. But in the end, the auditor decided to pick and choose and do their own narrative than to actually come back and get all the facts.
The fact that those 2 email accounts were deleted, and hopefully at some point we can get what was lost back, unfortunately casts a shadow over all of this, and that's not your fault, Representative Dockter, but it does. I mean, it makes this whole thing, for everybody trying to find the truth, it makes it complicated because there's a blank spot on the map right in the middle of all of this. One question I had is you talked about the Attorney General's office making, I don't know what you want to call them, prepayments But I'm reading here. This is from page 7 of your attorney's report. It's point 48. And you referred to this a little bit. It said that the total project costs were lower than previously estimated. As a result, the Attorney General has overpaid its share of construction expenses by $224,000. That's almost a quarter. Is that typical where the taxpayers prepay like that and then end up, I guess it's nice that the taxpayers will get $250,000 back, but is it normal that the state would overpay or prepay and then get so much? That seems really odd to me.
Yeah, again, this was not the norm. We were given by the AG's office that we had to have it as complete because they have money in their budget to complete by the 2021 biennium. So no, this is not the norm. And the 224,000. So actually, what happened when we come up and they said we're going to be short by this amount, we added it to their lease rate because their lease rate was $950. It went up to like 11. I can't remember the amount, and it would come back once this was paid off. So really, the Attorney General has paid extra rent since July 1 of 2021 until current, and so that whole amount they haven't paid, but we still owe them that amount, if that makes sense. Because what we did, we just added on to the per rate, the $950. We added the square foot, what it would be paid off in 5 years. And they've only paid a portion because we're only a year and a half of the 5 years. So the total, yes, is yes, and it is not the norm. But we were instructed that we need to have it so we can pay it for in the budget, and they were moving in, and so yes. And
can you understand how people might look at that and wonder if we would be getting the money back if this hadn't blown up into the news media?
Oh yeah, we always had. They always had. The AG always knew this was an estimate. We actually paid one of our last invoices on October 21st. We paid our invoice. We had to get landscaping. We had to get everything with the supply chain and everything. We couldn't get some of the things done. The AG's office was fully aware this whole time it was an estimate. And so when they talk about cost overruns, technically in this instance, it's not an overrun. They had changes to what they wanted and then when the project was finished, now we know what the final project is and what the final AG. The AG they're getting 224,000 back, and they had all the money in their budget for 2021. So really, did they have an overrun? No, they had the money in the budget. But people made that perception because we tried to explain it's an estimate. We did not know what the costs were, and thank goodness they didn't need a new generator. We could figure it out so you use their current one, trying to save the taxpayers money. I'm a conservative guy. You go this. We're trying to do the best that you can do for the state to have a product that they can have. They have lower rent like they got, and they got everything they had because with BCI, like I said, they're very unique agency. They have bulletproof panels when you walk in. A lot of extra costs. That's custom things that a normal place would not need. They needed special things for evidence room. They need all these specialty items that's for law enforcement. It's no different than when our Burleigh County Jail was built. They had all these, and people are wondering the cost. Well, when you're doing a jail, you're doing extra things that's just not like you're building a house or regular office building.
Representative Dockter, I have one question. I know we're running short on time.
Okay.
You've been critical of Josh Gallion's audit report here, that it's somewhat incomplete. You guys weren't able to get your positions into this report before it was given to the committee. So Josh Gallion's the same party as you are. Can you help the listeners understand what Gallion's motivation would be to making you look bad? Because at the end of the day, it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube after that initial story came out. So what would the motivation be for the auditor to do this to make you look bad?
It's a great question. I'm not part of you can call them the Bastiats or the ultra conservative. I'm not part of that group. And like I mentioned before, the auditors have a pattern. He wants these gotcha audits. He wants to come out and make the news. I don't know why he does it. Yes, we are in the same party, but it just, to me, it doesn't matter Chad, if I'm a Republican or if it's a Democrat, this should never, ever happen to any private citizen or lawmaker or state agency. The Department of Commerce and the state library, I won't even go into that, how disturbing that is. I don't know. It's almost like the auditor, he did a narrative to make headlines instead of trying to get all the facts. And then to come out in the paper and say, well, we were rushing to have enough time. Get a hold of us. Find out. We're not the only one. I mean, we had the DHS this summer, I think $6 million. I know the person that's part of it. That was give me information, but they never, typically before Josh Gallion took over, the auditors would go to the individuals and say, hey, we have an issue. Can you help us out? I own a payroll company. We have sales tax audits all the time for our clients. And the first thing the auditors, if they're missing something, hey, I'm missing invoice, Can you get that back to me? We give it to them and they go and they file a report. That's how it should go. But for some reason, this auditor goes through these and then comes up with these gotcha audits. And it creates a lot of anxiety for people. And it doesn't need to happen. Yes, do your job, be a watchdog. That's great. But make sure to get all your facts and everything before you present a report that people are going to see. And I don't know if that answers it. To me, there's just a pattern here. I'm not the first one. I'm the first lawmaker, but there's been a pattern. I mean, you can go, question all these different audits, and to me, it's just a pattern. And they mentioned in the committee, Representative Kempenick, we have trust issues. I think we have a trust issue with the state auditor's office on are they doing accurate? Are they doing accurate? So these audits. So if we get one in the future, are we going to say, okay, was everything completed? Was everything done to the standards? I mean, there's strict standards for auditors. Most CPAs now will not even want to be an auditor because there's so many liability issues because you have to have everything in line. So things like what happened to us happened to Commerce and the state library. In the private sector, there'd be lawsuits and everything all over because they didn't do their job.
Jason, we're about 5 minutes over. I thank you so much for making your time available. I did want to ask one last question. Knowing what you know now, going back to the beginning of this deal, would you do anything different?
Oh, Rob, great question. Like with anything, you would do things different. Should we, after that conversation, should I just let it go and just go on my way? Should I, there's a lot of things we can do, like the invoicing. That's a prime example. It should have been Frontier Contracting doing business as Parkway so people can, to figure that out. Yes, like I always, and even with this audit report or anything, every audit does have deficiencies. It's just getting the facts and everything out. Yes, could we have done things differently? Yes, I totally. And to Chad's point, the conflict and yes, how it looks. In my eyes, I know at the end of the day, because my parents always, taught me honest.
Well, Jason, I appreciate your time and coming on. And like I said, we are over. You're very generous with your time today. I appreciate it. Thanks for talking with us.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, just finishing up with Representative Jason Dockter. And, Chad, I think my big takeaway, and all due respect to Representative Dockter, I think he's missing out on something that listen, most of the public isn't in the state capitol during the session. Most of them don't visit the session. Most of them, including most of the people who do business with the state, aren't going to be hobnobbing with the director of the BCI and able to have what do you call it? A casual conversation, informal conversation about the office space needs of of the Attorney General's office. So I think there's a disconnect there, and I get it. Listen, we have a citizen legislature. That's something that the public wants. That's something that the public values. I understand that, and I'm like you. I'm not against people making a living, but I think if you're a lawmaker and you're going to do business with the state, you got to be a whole heck of a lot more self-aware than Jason Dockter was in this situation.
Yeah, and I think that, the when are you a citizen? When are you a legislator? The reality is, he made the point at the end, you're always a legislator.
And that's true. I think that's true.
Yep. And I think that the reality is, if you're a sitting legislator, you do have to hold yourself to a little bit higher standard to avoid conflicts or perceptions of conflicts, because, people are looking for reasons to not trust their government. There's lots of stuff in this story. I mean, from the lost emails to whatever, that pour fuel on the fire of, this is what we are worried about. But I agree that Representative Dockter still doesn't seem to completely understand the sort of how it looks. I mean, the fact that he's having these conversations, and you can say that you're doing it as a citizen, but if you're wearing that name badge, it's the middle of the session. And he also said, we talked about an interim meeting, or we talked about a committee meeting, and then we started talking about this. I mean, you can't just take off those hats back and forth whenever it's convenient. And again,
why? I mean, think of the position that puts a state employee in.
Yeah.
Think of the position that puts a state employee. Now, was Representative Dockter intending to put the state employee in that position? I don't know. I don't know what's in his heart. I can't speak to it. I'd like to think no, but the reality is,
and I do think no. I don't think he was like, putting the pressure on. But we sometimes don't, as citizens, as human beings, don't understand the power dynamics that are happening in conversations. And if you're a sitting legislator during the session with budgets before you, there is a power dynamic there that maybe the head of BCI understood that Jason Dockter didn't.
It's like your boss inviting you to a barbecue, right? Is it required? Right. No. But when your boss asks you something to come to his house in a social setting, do you have a beat before you say no?
Yeah. Is this mandatory or is this mandatory?
Right. And again, is the boss intending, like, is he going to fire you for not coming to your barbecue or whatever? Again, you'd like to think no, but who wants to take that risk? I think that's a tough thing. I don't think multi-million-dollar contracts with the state should start with informal conversations. I think the process has to be a lot more rigorous to this. And if your answer is, oh, trust me, I'm sorry, that's not enough. To your point, in this environment where Americans have lost faith in their political institutions, you always have to be scrupulous. But gosh, now more than ever.
And I also think just the general distrust of the auditor's office is really interesting, and how Gallion has sort of changed the way the office operates in terms of headlines and that kind of thing.
He is more aggressive. I don't think there's any question. And I think the criticism of him of being a little bit of a headline hound, I think particularly earlier on in his tenure in office, I think that was probably an apt criticism. We had some stuff. The incident with the state library that Representative Dockter mentioned is a fair criticism of the auditor. Right. The incident with the Commerce Department, again, I think is a fair criticism of the auditor that doesn't make them wrong here.
Right. Well, and I think the one thing that I'll say about Representative Dockter, and a point that I would agree with, is if the auditor's office was not done with this audit and hadn't got all the information from all the sides, they should have kept their mouths shut until they're ready to have the whole conversation, because that does open them up to criticism, like that they had figured out what the story was before they even did the work.
You can't come out and say, oh, well, we had a time limit. You can ask. That time limit wasn't written in stone. They could have asked the legislature for more time. So they do open themselves up and they weaken their ultimate report. So that's a fair criticism of Gallion, but there are so many parts of this. And I would encourage people, if you're listening to this, I know the Tribune and stuff, I'm going to put the entire 816 pages online. There's a very good summary in the first, 10 or so pages, 9 pages, I think. A lot of what follows is a lot of contracts, a lot of emails. I could tell you, as somebody who read several hundred pages of it, it reads faster than you would think, just because so much of it is just email that lots of filler. But I would encourage people to take a look at it, consider the arguments. But anyway, we'll put a pin in that. That discussion, that story, I think, is far from over. Let's talk about the election. Next time we record this show, you and I together, will be after Election Day. What do you think is going to happen, Chad?
Well, first of all, have you voted yet?
I am not. I like going on Election Day.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to do early voting. They make it pretty easy in Burleigh County. And
sure.
First of all, we encourage everybody to get out and vote, right, Rob?
Oh,
no matter how they're going to vote.
Absolutely.
What do I think is going to happen next week? I mean, I think on the statewide, incumbents and the Republicans are going to have a good night. I think what I'm going to be sort of looking at is, what is Hoeven's number? Does he, Hoeven, I think, wins without a question, but how much over 50 is he? Does he get up to 60? And then in the House race, I'm looking at, what does Cara Munn get? I think anything north of 40 is a really impressive showing for a non-Republican in the state.
Yeah.
So those are two of the things I'm looking at. And then, of course, the initiated measures as well. I'm looking at both weed and term limits and seeing where those go. I suspect they'll both pass. Would be my guess.
I think weed's going to fail. I think
you think weed's in trouble?
And I think they're in trouble. I think they're underwater. I'm hearing some rumors that the people backing it, which by the way is the tobacco industry, who very much would like to get into the marijuana industry, that they're reallocating their resources to other states. Those are rumors that I'm hearing, and I think they may have written off North Dakota. So I think that one's going down. And
because the poll numbers are bad, or just they don't like the way the campaign's being run, or all of the above?
I think a little bit of all of the above. The other thing is with term limits, I think it's going to pass. I think it might be closer. I was expecting an absolute landslide. I think some of the pushback from Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, there's also been some surprising names. Somebody forwarded me an email from Charlie Nelson. I don't know if she was one of the organizers of the 2012 Eliminate Property Tax campaign. She's very much a Rick Becker supporter. She's very much in that sort of milieu of politics, and she came out strongly against the term limits measure. So, Kent French, who was the reason why we have term limits for, even though it's not enforced because of a Supreme Court ruling, he's the reason why we have term limits in the North Dakota Century Code right now. He was against it. So there's been some surprising voices. I still think it passes, but I think it might get 60% as opposed to 70%.
I think the proponents of this thing just got it on the ballot. Not exactly a straight line to get it on the ballot. It took some turns. But I think once they got on the ballot, they decided they didn't have to run a campaign. I haven't heard anything from the proponents. The opposition, while forming late, and I'm not sure state legislators talking about term limits being bad are the best messengers that you're ever going to see. But I do think Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, and some of those groups are interesting. I also take like the Kent French thing with a little bit of grain of salt. He wanted term limits in Washington when the whole delegation was Democrat, and now he's against term limits in the state when everybody's a Republican. So take that with a grain of salt. But I agree. I think that's going to be closer than I would have guessed. I've actually had a few people who've predicted it's going to go down, which was not something people were saying 3 weeks ago. But I'm with you. I think it'll pass.
I think it's going to pass. I think how close it is maybe going to raise some eyebrows. I think you're right too. I think at this point, Katrina Christensen did not do herself any favors with her debates. I think she hurt herself. I think she probably fell. What I'm interested in is if that helps or hurts Becker or Hoeven. I have a lot of feeling that people who leave Christensen behind, if they're still going to vote in the Senate race, are probably going to cast a ballot for Hoeven. I do think that Becker's probably picking up some momentum. So I think for Becker, the question is can he come in second? Can he beat Christensen? Because I think that's probably a win for him if he does. And then for Mund, I don't think she's going to get 40%. I think she has to beat probably Mark Haugen, who obviously, symbolically, he was pushed out of that House race. He put up 34% running for treasurer. Granted, that was a presidential year, but he put up 34%. Can she beat that? And she may. But, I don't think she's going to win. I think both Hoeven and Becker are going to have 20 points on their nearest rival.
So I think, in the Senate race, I think another thing that's going to be interesting, are there sort of squishy Dems or lean Dems that are nervous that Becker might beat Hoeven and end up voting for Hoeven because they don't think Katrina will win? Are there some of those? But yeah, I think in that Senate race, who's going to take second? I hope Katrina takes second. I want Rick Becker to take third. I'm not going to hold back on that. I hope he gets 2%. And he goes away for a while. I think that'd be better for our state.
I really want our state's voters to reject angry people. I want them to reject a certain style of politics, a certain style of campaigning. That's frankly not good for our democracy. I'd like to see them reject that both in the House and Senate race with a strong showing.
So Rob, we haven't really talked since the Senate debates, and you referenced this. But were you at all surprised at the debate last week that we moderated with how aggressive Hoeven came out? I was a little, Hoeven is sort of a above the fray kind of guy. And 5 minutes in, he was going through Becker's voting record and really going after him pretty hard. Were you surprised by that? It took me a little bit back that Hoeven was in the fray with those two guys the way that he did.
No, because I think Hoeven's done it before when he's needed to. I think he has that in his toolkit. The thing is he clearly doesn't like doing it. I mean, that's what I heard. Like, I don't think he is at all comfortable with that brand of politics. I think he feels forced into it because what are you going to do when you're sitting in the middle and you're getting cannon fire from the left and the right? You can't just sit there. So, I don't think he had a choice. I don't think it's his brand of politics. I don't think he's particularly good at it. But I feel like he felt he had to do it, and he's probably right.
Yeah, and I talked to some people who afterwards were like, "Oh my goodness, you had 3 really angry people on the air with you." And at times, I felt like you and I would just throw out a subject and just let the 3 of them just go after each other for a while, and then try to hold them back.
And then try to hold them back, and they get yelled at a little bit when we tried to. They got a little mad that our approach to this is very informal. I would rather let them talk. Obviously, I'm not going to let anybody filibuster and fill the whole space, but, they got a little feisty. They felt Hoeven was talking for too long there. And it's just like, I'm trying to listen, I didn't cut, if you listen to that whole thing, I didn't cut anybody off, really,
right,
without one of them, instigating it. I wasn't there to try to cut anybody off. I had warned them beginning, please let each other talk. Obviously, we had some selective adherence to that advice.
And I didn't think there was a lot of talking over each other either. I mean, I think there was a few different times,
a couple times,
overall.
But yeah, it was better than I expected on that front.
So what do you think is going to happen nationally on Tuesday?
I don't know. It's so bizarre. I feel like the Republicans are going to take the House. I don't think there's any question there.
I think the question there is how big. Do they pick up 10 seats or do they pick up 35?
Right. I think it's going to be a question of scale, but I think we're going to come out of this with Republicans in control of the House. I'm 50-50 on if they're going to take the Senate. Herschel Walker is a very weak Senate candidate. The situation in Pennsylvania is odd. Oz is a weak candidate, but Fetterman is. There are legitimate concerns about him having a stroke, and the way Democrats have handled that, where anyone being concerned about him having a stroke and his ability to function as a senator. I'm sorry, when you're a United States senator, your job is debating. So if you can't debate effectively, I don't know how you can be an effective senator. That's fair. Now, the problem is the alternative to Fetterman at this point is Oz. And I can understand why that gives a lot of people pause too. So I don't know. The Pennsylvania race is really Democrat, and what frustrates me is that Fetterman had the stroke at a time where Democrats could have replaced him. And they could have replaced him with somebody, Connor Lamb, who's a current member of the House of Representatives, who is widely seen as a very serious candidate, serious-minded person. I think that would have been a much more interesting race than Oz v. Fetterman, because now it's all about the stroke as opposed to issues, and so that frustrates me. I think it's a coin flip on whether Republicans hold the Senate or take the Senate.
Yeah, so I think 2 weeks ago I would have said the Democrats were going to hold it 50-50, that they were going to pick up Pennsylvania and lose Nevada. Now as somebody who wants the Democrats to hold the Senate, I'm less optimistic. I think there's a chance that Fetterman loses. I think there's a chance that Herschel Walker wins down in Georgia, and you still lose the seat in Nevada as well. So, I mean, I could see this ending up a 52-48 Republican Senate. I just think the underlying sort of Biden's number being bad, people are unhappy with the economy. These races are so tight that I think those are going to tip them one way or other. The only reason the Democrats have a shot is because the Republicans nominated people like Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz. That's the only reason Dems have a shot.
I think part of it, I think too, is Democrats really thought that the Dobbs decision was going to reset these races, and for the most part, it didn't. I think Americans care, and a lot of people have very passionate positions about abortion, and I'm not belittling it as an issue, but when you can't go to the grocery store without it costing you $200, when fuel prices are through the roof, you know, when any raises that you may have gotten at your job are being almost completely wiped off, if not entirely, you're still going backwards because of inflation. I'm sorry. It's not the issue. I think Democrats badly miscalculated. I frankly, I think here in North Dakota, I think Cara Munn thought that she was going to get lightning in the bottle. The Dobbs decision came down. She was going to come out. She was going to campaign on that issue. I'm not hearing her talk a lot about that issue right now.
So I think, yeah, and I think the nice thing is we'll know in a week, right? We'll know if the Dobbs thing was overplayed or not.
I think it was hugely overplayed.
I think in terms of Cara, though, I mean, I think part of her goal in this campaign was to talk about Dobbs and to talk about abortion, win or lose. So we'll see how that plays.
I feel like we're lowering the bar a little bit if it's just
maybe we are. But I'm steeling myself for a difficult night for Democrats on Tuesday. It just feels like this is the way it should have been a long time ago.
And here's the thing, though, is to me, as someone who is conservative, obviously, and more generally supportive of Republicans, it's a chilly sort of victory because I'm sorry, we're at a point as the Republicans are at a point of the party. It doesn't matter. I saw somebody put it referencing something Donald Trump said, where you could shoot somebody on Park Avenue and nobody would care. Herschel Walker could pay for somebody's abortion on Park Avenue. And it just doesn't matter anymore. And that frustrates me. We're at a point where the Republican Party doesn't care about integrity. They don't care about lying. When I see a lot of the Republican, people like Donald Trump Jr., a lot of congressional candidates, the way they've reacted to the Paul Pelosi thing, where somebody broke into the Speaker of the House's home looking for her in it was a half-assed assassination attempt. And we're lucky that it was half-assed because ultimately, nobody really got hurt, as terrifying as it was. But, as Americans, you should be upset about that. That is our Speaker of the House. I don't like Nancy Pelosi. I wish she'd never been elected to Congress. I wish she would have stayed in the private sector and lived a healthy, happy life. If you're an American and somebody attacks our Speaker of the House, your only position, if you're a decent human being, should be outrage. And I'm not hearing that from a lot of Republicans right now. And that scares the hell out of me, Chad.
Amen, Rob. I've actually been, the last 72 hours or so, just sort of sad about how this Paul Pelosi thing has been played out in social media. Because if we can't, agree on this, what the heck can we agree on? And, I saw clips of Nancy Pelosi's daughter, taking shots at Rand Paul after his neighbor beat him up that were super inappropriate. That's not acceptable either.
I don't want to go down the road of whataboutism, but we've been doing this where
we all have to be better human beings. And when the former president and his son are tweeting things like they are, Paul Pelosi got hit in the head with a hammer. He's an 82-year-old man who was in his house. The guy wanted to kill the Speaker of the House. Full stop. It's a terrible thing for our country.
It is. But again, when it's like we're only going to condemn the things that are politically convenient. We saw the whole blow up about the situation here in North Dakota, where the kid got run over, and everybody tried to turn that into a political issue, and it wasn't. I don't think it was. I think the guy got caught for it. came up with the first excuse on his mind. I don't think it ever really had anything to do with politics, but try to convincing people of that at this point.
Right.
When people were burning down police stations, all right, and there was one side of that argument that was just shrugging their shoulders, like, I guess the time Lloyd Omdahl's writing papers, sometimes you got to burn stuff down to make a point. That's not okay, Chad. And this isn't me doing whataboutism. This is me saying, please, everybody, find some decency again.
Well, and one of the other frustrations I have is everything is partisan. Like, McFeely did a column on a hunting thing up in New Rockford where people were accusing people of being Democrats as if that's the worst thing in the world. And like, what does partisanship have to do with neighborly conflict or neighbors getting together or whatever? Not everything is Democrat versus Republican.
I went to a Halloween party, and just about everybody at that party disagrees with me politically. I had a great time. Wonderful time. Nice people. We mostly didn't talk about politics. We talked a little bit. I am who I am, so everybody wants, what do you think is going to happen with the election, Rob? And I kind of, everybody wants my predictions. Like, my predictions are worth, I don't know.
The one thing that I will confidently predict is that nobody knows anything. That's the one thing I know.
Nobody knows anything for sure. I'll tell you that. I think we're probably right. I think we're right. I think the incumbents are safe. To me, the question mark is how big of a point can Mund and Becker make in their races, and what's the benchmark for making that point? I have a feeling the mystique of Rick Becker is going to take a pretty big dent in the fender. Cara Mund, I don't know. We'll see what she can do. I think it's going to be pretty underwhelming, but who knows?
And then I think the question for Cara is what's next. What happens after this election? Is this something that she wants to continue pursuing or not?
I'm really interested in what she's going to do. My understanding is she doesn't have a job right now. She just graduated from college, so she's been running for Congress. She doesn't have a job right now. So where does she get a job? She's going to have to work somewhere. If she gets a job in North Dakota, she's probably running again. But she keeps talking about how she gave up a job in Chicago or something. If she takes a job in a place like Chicago, I have a feeling we're probably not going to see her on the ballot here, at least not anytime soon.
And to be clear, she's going to have a ton of offers with her background and her schooling. So I think that she'll have a lot of choices.
She will. That's the only point I'm making. What choice she makes might give us a pretty good indication of what what her future political career is.
She's always said she wants to be governor, Rob.
Yeah, well, good luck to her. The other thing too is that you only get to run this campaign she's run this year once. She's defined herself in a lot of ways now, for good and evil. I mean, that is what it is, but you only get to be a blank slate once. So anyway, well, that's it for today. Thanks everybody for listening, and I guess we'll talk to you again after the election.